Hey guys, today's video we are going to be upgrading a Auto World 4 gear. We're going to be adding ProTrack rims off the Viper site along with the proper size tires for those rims, and we're going to add some pickup shoes. We'll go over a couple of other things, but let's jump right into this. We are going to cut this thing open. I'm not one that cares much about keeping the blister packaging, so I usually just cut it open, remove the loot, throw it away. If there is somebody that's interested in those, let me know, because we do go through quite a bit of them. But I'm gonna go ahead and pop the body off of this thing, look it over. So it's basically just a stock 4 gear. As you can see, I mean, nothing super special, but we actually, let's go run this thing before, we'll get a baseline just before we do these changes. That we'll head out to the track and do that right now. All right, so we're gonna check and see how well it sticks. So it actually is stuck pretty dang good. So pretty good downforce, definitely on there. So we don't have to worry about it falling on the ground. Okay, we're at the track. Gonna give this guy test pass. Well, actually, we'll run the left lane today. On the left lane, get our baseline. Okay, looking pretty normal.
114 with a 3.
Okay. Okay, so that was our base pass. We'll do another one just for the heck of it. I don't usually have super high expectations out of these things, so but it's not too bad. Doesn't actually sound too bad, so I think once we get our upgrades and stuff on this thing, it'll actually be pretty quick. So 1.0994. So if this was a CDRL car, definitely would want to slow it down to get out of that 1.0 class, because right now you're real close to 1.1, but we're gonna see what happens when we upgrade the wheels and tires and put different pickup shoes and stuff on it. So let's head up to the office, we'll go from there. All right, we're back at the table. We're gonna go ahead and start upgrading this thing. So one thing I forgot to mention was I usually will get rid of the stock guide pin. So I usually will pull that out and I put the Viper Pro guide pin in there. Some guys like that one, but it's just my preference. But basically, first thing I'm gonna do, pull the wheels and tires off of this thing, and we'll get it ready to be fitted with the ProTrack stuff. So grab my puller. So the front rims are pressed on, and sometimes you can press them off without damaging the backside of the wheel, which does make it where it is usable again. But other times it will come off and it'll start to tweak the wheel. Like this one, I can see that it started to tweak the wheel pretty bad. So it's probably not usable, but I mean, if you wanted to put them on a show car or whatever, you totally could. I mean, these are lettered tires, Goodyears from this particular car. I don't really care for them that much, and I honestly have a huge Ziploc bag full of parts from these cars. But yeah, same with the rear tires. The rear axles on these are they're splined, and because they're splined, it just makes the rim hole huge. So I mean, you probably could reuse these again also, but I would definitely recommend that if you do that, you're gonna have to use some Loctite on them. So, but because this stuff is mass produced, it, you know, and the rims come off of a tree. Actually, I'm not sure. I can't say that they come off a tree. I wouldn't doubt that they come off of a tree, but you know, anything that comes off of a tree is not going to be as accurate as something that's actually machined. So now we have kind of our naked car. The next thing that we can do is pull the pickup shoes off. A lot of times these things are like smashed in there. Like this one is like really smashed in there. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to use my tweezers. I'm going to try to get that spring out of there before it goes flying out of there, because I've lost just way too many of those things. But yeah, I mean, you can see this thing is like just fully locked in there. Not good. Usually we'll end up with, you know, tweaking the electrical components, which they're already not super good, and when they get tweaked it just makes them that much worse. So I mean, I usually give a once over of all this stuff. You can see this one, I mean, the stuff is just crazy that it's, I don't want to like say, I mean, it's crazy that it's as bad as it is. I mean, I'm just gonna say it, but I get it. They're mass produced. They don't care. People that make these look at them as a toy. We don't. So it is what it is. But another trick that I do on these ones that you can do, and you have to be really careful, but I use a flathead screwdriver and I'll just stretch the spring just a little tiny bit, okay? And then I'll reinstall the spring. This part, still perfecting. I've done a couple of different methods on it, but usually just being as gentle as possible is kind of the preferred method. But it's really just a matter of finesse. So make sure that stuff gets down in there. And like I said too, you could replace, you know, put longer springs in there, but you have to be very, very careful because these cars don't have a lot of magnetic downforce on the front of the car. So if you put too much spring tension on them, it'll just lift the front tires off the ground. So that one's pretty good. That part is happy. Next thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll put some oil on the rear axle. And that's just because depending on how far I press the wheels on will depend on how much room I have to actually get the oiler down in there. So done it enough times to kind of know that probably need to do that before we pop the rims on there. So the rims that we're using on this car are going to be the ProTrack Star and Gold. Really, really cool rim. I love these rims. They're very, very detailed. I mean, look at but they are, you know, sometimes they're hard to find. We've been waiting on wheel orders this month for quite a while. I mean, actually, we've been waiting on rims since the second week of January. But one thing too, I back the screws out of those. They aren't a slip-on rim. They don't just slip right onto the Auto World axle. They are going to be press-on. So if you're going to press them on, you also want to make sure that you back that screw out so that you're not pressing that screw on. Otherwise, you'll end up breaking the rim. That's happened a few times to guys in the past. They've, you know, reached out and said, "Hey, I broke this rim," or whatnot. So that's usually why that happens. Something that I also like to do is I like to put a little chamfer on the backside here. So use my chamfer bit, which you want to make sure too that the shavings and all that stuff don't go inside your wheel. But I just use a 90-degree. I mean, this is obviously way overkill, but being you know, former tool maker, machinist, like having carbide titanium nitride coated tools, pretty normal for me, but it's not necessary. You don't have to go that far, but I just like to give it a little bit of a lead in there so that when we press the wheels on, we can give it a little bit more of a chance of not being crooked. So we're gonna go ahead and get this guy in the press. Okay, and I always make sure that everything is as centered as possible and that the rim isn't crooked, that the car's not crooked, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So I do that, and then I'm gonna go ahead and press them on to the desired width, which I usually will just leave in here. I'll leave just enough room to get my oiler in there. Now, if you're running a different body or if you're wanting to really narrow that thing up, obviously you can do whatever you want. But for this car, I know that this process works for these. We're gonna go ahead and flip this. We'll do the other side. When I do the other side, I always try to make sure that I'm lining up the set screws, which you probably don't have to do. I just like to do it because I guess maybe it's a little bit of like OCD, just seeing them on the same plane. But after I get both those pressed on, I'll go ahead and tighten the screws down. They're just snug. They actually don't even need to be in there because the wheels were pressed on, but I'm sure if you took them out and you put them somewhere, they're so small, they're gonna get lost. So I do that just so that they're in there. If I ever want to remove them and put them on a smaller axle setup, I have that axle setup, or I have the set screws. I don't have to look for them. Next up, we're gonna install the Viper, the narrow rear tires. Just like with all tires, I always use my fingernail on the lip of the rim while pushing the tire up against the back edge. That's pretty normal for me, but you just wanna make sure that they spin and that they're going on there as good as possible. These rear axles a lot of times are bent pretty bad, so there's only so much that you can do. And you know, if you're pressing a good rim onto a bent axle, there's not a ton of stuff that you can do for that. But you know, you could actually put the tire on purposely in a way that counteracts that bend, but we're not gonna worry about that today. So that's just kind of a tip for you down the road. So we got the Viper axle set up here. Comes with 2 pins. This is for the front rims. This comes with the ProTrack front rims. I like to take pliers. I'm just gonna hold them with the pliers, then I take my fingernail and I give it just a little bit of a bend, okay? So you'll see that's not installed all the way right now because of the bend. And then what I'll do is I will use my press to push that on the rest of the way. And I repeat this process on both sides, but obviously after this one, we'll install the rim. Okay, we're gonna go long wheelbase. Okay, and then I'll bend this next pin. And I always pre-install it by hand. And then we'll press this part on. I'll show you a little trick that I do here so that you're not pressing it on completely tight, but I usually will, I'll start watching this amount of slop right here and I'll run that down just until about right there to where I have a little bit of movement, and that's where I'll stop it. So you want a little bit of play up there. Really, the more uneven your track is and the more joints that your track has, the more play you want to have on the front there. So went ahead and installed the front tires. Just like the rears, you want to make sure that the fronts get installed correctly. So a lot of times the fronts I will roll on a table, and obviously I'm doing it at a 45-degree angle so that my guide pin is not touching the ground, but those look really good. And that thing is pretty much ready to run. But before we do that, I like to put it on a piece of track. and I'll run it back and forth a few times, or I will also look at it to see what the pickup shoe surface looks like in relation to the track rail. So if you look on these shoes, you can see a little bit of a witness mark in exactly the same spot. So that's a great starting point. Next up, we're gonna oil the front axle setup, just because it is a new setup. I put a little bit of oil on the axle where it contacts the chassis, and then I also will pull the clearance, like pull the clearance in the wheel where like it has the slop. I'll open that up and I'll drop a little bit between the rim and the chassis on both sides, just so that there's a little bit of oil in there. I mean, you could put a little dot of oil inside the rim before you put the axle on, because it is metal on metal, even though it's an anodized surface. And obviously, you know, you want that to be as smooth as possible. I have an old Magna Traction that has aluminum front end and rear end on it, and that thing, it'll start squeaking sometimes. So, but that's that. We totally transformed that car. It looks bad to the bone now. Wheelie bars aren't touching. I did have one the other day. The body was set differently and the wheelie bars were touching. And I changed the rear tires on it and I went to run it on the track, and it literally just sat there and revved. And I was like, what in the world is going on here? And it was like the wheels were long and oval, and I just clipped them off, or clipped half of them off, and it fixed it. So let's head out to the track and see what kind of improvement happened with our car. All right, guys, we're at the track. We got our modded 4-gear. Last pass, 1099 was the last pass we made on it. So let's see what kind of improvement we got out of it. All right.
968.
968. So we picked up almost a 1/10 and a half. So that's pretty good. Something I always look at as soon as I run these things is I want to look at the pickup shoe wear, which running it for 15 feet, it's not going to have really any wear. It's more of a witness mark. But I look at that to just give me an idea of how well the shoes are, how flat they are. We didn't tweak these shoes. I probably wouldn't tweak them, especially if you don't know what you're doing. I mean, I could make a small adjustment, or just from running this thing a few more times, they'll kind of come in on their own. But tweaking them can, you know, if you go too far, it's really hard to get back to where you were. So looks like it's running pretty good. So,
yeah, 975.9.
975, so solidly under 1 second. This basically, if you watched our 4-gear armature upgrade video, this is essentially the car that we started with. Different body, obviously, and different wheel sets, but those same mods were done to it. So if we put a 5.5 ohm in this car, I would expect to see it drop into the 6s as well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that one. Hopefully you enjoyed cruising along with us to build this bad to the bone looking Don Prudhomme Snake 2. We'll see you on the next one.